Okay, we're in here. Hey guys, we're going to give everyone a couple, maybe a minute or so to get settled in. Thanks for joining us.
Excellent. I swear the 2024 State of Community Engagement report just came out. So this one's,
I
it's
know.
a shock. How are we
I
already
know.
here?
I was
Uh,
thinking that too when we were kicking off this in the spring. I was like, didn't we just do this? And here we are again.
Pretty crazy.
it goes faster as we go.
It does.
I think it was a particularly busy year in public sector engagement. There's a lot of things happening, so that could be part of it. Um,
Yeah.
but regardless of that, I am so excited to be back in the room with Brad. For those of you who are trickling in, Brad was our first official full-time employee at Public Input back in 2016.
Yep.
And one of the first things Brad told me was like, "Hey, I'm going to do this for a little bit, but I want to go be a PhD and teach, engagement as a professor." And I was like, "Yeah. Okay. Well, let's build a company first." And sure enough, like 5 or 6 years later, when
Well,
did
and
you
I
get back to school,
remember
Brad? Was it was
sorry,
that
go
in
ahead.
21 or Brad? When did you go back to the PhD program?
Oh man, that was 2019.
19. Yeah.
Yeah, and got through doing research now on public participation and public engagement and local government and the data problems therein, which ties right into our conversation today. So
Super
glad to
simple
keep the
stuff.
conversation going. It's so see you guys.
Yeah.
I remember back meeting with Tricia originally and being so excited about the possibilities of something like this to be able to support your work. And
That's what I was gonna say. I
yeah,
remember talking to you and getting so excited because you had your MPA and so did I, and you like just got it. Like, okay, I was working at the Metropolitan Planning Organization at that time. Okay, we're at two after. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to
awesome.
welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to be taking a look inside the 2025 Community Engagement Report. Um, just a little housekeeping before we get started. Our Q&A feature is turned on today, so feel free to use that at any time during the session. And we're going to reserve some time at the end to do Q&A and discuss. So also, if you're interested in receiving a recording of this webinar, you don't need to ask for it. Just keep an eye out on your inbox because you'll get one in your email in about 24 hours. Oh, the fun part, introduction. So my name is Trisha Thomas, and I'm the content marketing manager here at Public Input, and I also happen to be an engagement practitioner for local gov. Really quick, we got Jay Dawkins on the line, as well as Dr. Brad Johnson. Jay's the CEO and founder of Public Input, and Dr. Brad Johnson works at the University of Nevada, Reno. A little deeper into your bios, so bear with me. I know that's probably embarrassing, but we're doing it. Jay is a professional engineer with a background in planning and previously worked as a transportation planning consultant. I assume that means potholes. Um, in
Some long
2014,
range. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, potholes. Everybody cares about potholes. In 2014, he left consulting to focus on building a software program, Brad. Well, this is the interactive part. I love this. Get your phones out. If you haven't had a copy of our newest State of Community Engagement Report, be sure to use this link or the QR code. I love when you do that, Jay. It makes me want to do it too, and then I get
Yeah.
distracted.
It's fun.
The purpose of this webinar is to explore the findings of this report. So grab your copy and follow along. Just a real quick for our agenda, I'm going to take a quick dip into the resident demographics before we dive into the findings. As part of this discussion, Jay and Brad are going to join to provide perspectives and practical real world examples of how these findings can be applied in your practice and your home communities. And as I mentioned before, we'll reserve time for Q&A. So before we dig in, I want to send a special thanks to all of our valued customers who are joining us today online. I see your names on there. And we're always excited to welcome any new faces. And for those new folks who are exploring our community engagement software. We hope this session gives you a peek into who we are, how we're willing to help, and what we care about, because we want to be your partners in helping you overcome barriers and engaging your community. So thanks again for joining us for demographics time. So just a little background for those of you who aren't familiar with our national survey. This is the 4th year, which I cannot believe that. It
Yeah,
seems
we
maybe like
just
the
started
second or
yesterday,
third.
so yeah.
Yeah. So
But
it's a
it's great to see some
nationwide
trends.
study. Oh, sorry. What was that?
Sorry, it's great to see the trends start emerging too. So we'll cover that today.
Yes, I know. I have some notes here because I went back a couple years just to see. So this is a nationwide study to see how residents perceive and experience engagement with their local governments. And the reason we do this is because we want to help you all understand how residents are viewing those experiences with local community engagement efforts. So just a little sneak peek here, like little quick view. This was 1,000 voting age residents across the US. Each year, we try to get a representative sample of the US population. We also do 2 surveys, one in English and one in Spanish, because we know about 12 to 14% of people are Spanish speaking. Let's see, I'm not going to read all this. You see, majority, 76% were white, followed by African American at 12%. One thing that I did notice was a little change here. Let me look at my notes. So this year for education, we had a majority of people at 57% with a college degree. Last year, about 53% were high school degree or less. So I thought that was a really interesting change. Kind of made me curious, like, what does that mean for like the correlation for the other questions? But just kind of me nerding out on the data a little bit. And then income and region, we saw a good mix across the categories. I will say I'm excited to see that prefer not to say income question wasn't the majority, because I know that's like sometimes sensitive and people will do that go to. I'm not going to answer. So it was cool to see. And then employed people were most likely to respond to this. Okay. Oh, I'll check in my notes here. Okay, so the insights. We had 5, and the first one was show your reach. So this theme really centered on the first insight that quiet doesn't necessarily mean opposition. So when we asked residents who didn't respond to local government outreach, I'm gonna sneeze.
Bless you.
Sorry. um, when we asked residents why they didn't respond to local government outreach, why they didn't participate, we found a pattern in the responses that we kind of described as indifference. So 60% of the answers ranged from people saying, well, the issue didn't affect me, nothing stood out, or they simply didn't have a strong feeling, so they just didn't respond. So when I saw this, I thought it was really exciting because I often would wonder if the silence was a consequence of ineffective outreach or outreach, like outright disagreement or disillusionment with the process. So it was kind of cool to see the residents explain what their silence meant. So Jay, you
Yeah.
want to talk about what this means in action?
Yeah, I mean, this one, uh, we hear a lot about folks that if they're currently doing engagement with maybe more traditional methods, like we are spending so much energy and effort trying to reach people, and we're only getting a few folks participating. Sometimes that it might mean that we're not using the right channels. We're going to talk about channels today, but other times it could mean that the topic that you're covering does not elicit a strong response from the community, and generally that should not be a blocker to getting the work of government done. And I think this data can support cases where we can show our reach and show that we informed the people affected by this decision or this project. Um, when you have the data to show that you reached those people and they had a chance to engage and chose not to, it can give you the backstop you need to be able to move forward with a project or a decision. If you don't have the ability to show that reach, sometimes it's a, hey, we only heard from a few dozen people. Then it's up to our elected officials or leaders to say, well, we're going to go forward anyway, or we want to get worst case scenario to say, well, it sounds like we need to do more engagement and go back to the community on this to make sure we're not going to mess this up. Or even worst case scenario, a handful of angry voices are able to derail a project in spite of broad community support. So ultimately what we were looking at here was let's make sure folks can show their reach. And that's one of the key things about public input that we can touch on. We've got a case study here in a moment, but um, we want to unlock the ability to keep projects moving, even if people don't have a strong opinion about them.
Yeah.
And part of that's what we talk about here at Hillsborough. But Brad, I know this is a topic near and dear to your
Oh, I
heart.
mean,
We've
I,
been
I
talking about it
think,
for
you know,
years.
it's often a challenge, right? You feel that pressure for folks. They do a ton of work. They put a ton of time and energy and effort into reaching a lot of people. And then they get responses. Things might be complicated. Things might not be activating folks. And it's really exciting to see in these results that for a pretty significant majority of folks, when they've been contacted, the reasons they haven't participated for the most part are because they're kind of indifferent to it. And it's not necessarily an affirmation, but it's also highlights that they are essentially skipping the opportunity to participate in these circumstances. So it's really exciting to see those results come out of this survey, and it's also, you know, exciting to see somewhere like Hillsborough County here, where they had multi-channel reach, significant impact across their community. And all of these different channels together showing a massive amount of reach, even beyond a pretty significant amount of impact here.
Being able to map, that's a key part of what we've built into the product, and being able to show, hey, we've heard from every corner of the community, or if we haven't heard from every corner of the community, here's our reach in every corner of the community. Obviously, this one's a big scale. Not everybody's going to be reaching 30,000 people. I saw one earlier today where Zebulon, North Carolina, here in our backyard, population around 10,000. They had reached, I think, over 650 people on a community park project. And I think a couple dozen had chimed in or subscribed and participated in some way. That doesn't mean you can't move forward with your community park. That means you did a good job reaching and engaging, and people don't have a very strong opinion about it, and that's okay. So ultimately, the data is there to help us show our work, show that we have effectively communicated and reached our community. And if we get a strong response, great, let's understand it. Let's report on that. If we don't get a strong response, the data is telling us that it's not something that people have a strong opinion on. So it's interesting to think about all the unlock this could bring for teams that are doing a lot of work and doing a great job of reaching every corner of their community, but maybe don't have the most actively engaged set of participants on every topic.
That's so hard to know, but I love, showing the reach because then you just don't have to stall out.
Yeah.
And then it becomes about increasing that reach, right? Then you can ask two questions, right? Do we need to increase
Cool. See what you guys are doing. Kind of basically, do you feel confident showing the number of people you reached on a community engagement project? Curious to see. Be able to see the results there too.
Nice. It'd be interesting if we even asked, not just the number you've reached, but also like the who and the where, I think are a big focus here. So cool to see the responses here. And are we going to cover all the responses at the end of this, or do we want to go through each question as we go?
I think Steph set it up so they can see
Ah, very
the
cool.
response options.
Yeah, once everyone's done voting, I'll just plop the response up there so folks can kind of see. And it looks like we're leveling out here in terms of people answering it. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here and then share the results with everybody.
Yay. Look like majority said yes.
Nice. That's excellent.
Okay. Our second insight, we pulled out, well, the findings were pretty straightforward for this one. So it talks about outreach preferences and how residents want to be engaged. So we asked residents, what's the best way for your local government to share important information? And we gave them a mix of standard options and less common options, and overwhelmingly, email came out on top. The next most popular options were postal mail and text messaging. And just to keep it interesting, I look back over the last few years, and text messaging has held a spot in the top three for 2 years in a row. So this replaced methods that they liked previously, like website notices and social media posts from government. And I think this told us something really important about what residents are expecting, which is like this modern, convenient way to engage. In addition, not replacing traditional methods because email and postal mail are still there. So it's just really interesting to see how it's changed and like what's sticking. And it seems like text messaging seems to be a fan favorite for people.
Yeah. And obviously postal mail hasn't gone anywhere. That's been there in the mix. But from a cost perspective, it's great to have that text messaging option as another direct way to reach. You know, the part I didn't notice when we first looked at the data, but like the idea that the newspaper is about as popular as the online channel is a surprising one here, knowing the
Mhm.
state of newspapers today. So um,
Well, it's
obviously it's a yes and on a lot of these kind of things.
well, it's highlighting the active nature. I think the fact that what you're seeing with email and even postal mail and text message, those are all active asks, right? They're going directly to someone, directly saying, "Hey, I want you to participate." Uh, uh, when you get down to something like a newspaper or a website or flyers, that's a passive. It's like here's an activity, and the others are very much asking. It's very much reaching out for folks to participate. It's saying you specifically are important to this effort, and we want you to provide your feedback.
And our goal when we're working with folks is to give you that direct access to residents. So every time you're doing an engagement, let's make sure we capture some kind of contact info, whether that's their email address, their physical address, their phone number. Having that ability to directly reach folks definitely aligns well with how residents are expecting or hoping to be contacted. So it's really cool to see that.
I have another poll question. This talks about what motivates you all. So we're curious, what mode would be most effective getting you to a public meeting or interested in engaging in a topic maybe that you're not familiar with? We're curious because you guys are residents and practitioners to see how this stacks up.
Yeah.
So I see email, postal, and text is number 3 so far. It's still changing. Or wait, no social.
Can't wait to see the percentage for radio.
Oh God, radio currently is at 6%.
Nice.
A little higher than newspaper.
I
You guys are gonna have to put in the chat what other means to you.
Yeah. And some good thoughts in the chat around like the crosstabs. Obviously, we should have some crosstabs on these by channel. That'd be an interesting one to follow up on.
mhm.
Oh, I didn't. I
There we
think
go.
I clicked something that Stephanie was clicking at the same time.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Can you see
So
the
in terms of the
results?
audience here, it's like yes, email's number one, but more social media preference among this group than among our uh, resident cohort.
Yeah.
That's super
Mhm.
interesting.
And I
Text
see
is
the
no
interesting
different.
question around that popped up around Nextdoor separately now. So as social media becomes more fragmented, I think it's a really interesting
Yeah.
question going forward. And I think as we hit future surveys, we're going to have to ask maybe more separated stuff where you have something like Nextdoor that's designed specifically for this type of engagement or this type of localized stuff versus a more sort of passive approach like Facebook might be considered.
So some of you may have attended our conversation with Charleston County on their land use planning process. Nikki Rimble joined a webinar and we talked through how they currently, on every rezoning case, every historic development case, um, across all their land use boards, they include an email, phone, and text option to participate in addition to the online engagement experience. And they've seen a lot of increase in engagement. And when Nikki pointed out that 16% of the responses were positive, I at first thought, oh gosh, that's tough. That seems pretty low. She's like, oh no, it used to be like 1%. So seeing a shift in the conversation through bringing more voices into it was certainly a big part of it. So the um, some good lessons there. A lot of that again is just like once you get these things stood up with public input, you can just rinse and repeat. We're not having to reinvent the wheel, but we're providing a flexible way for residents to engage. And then on the back end, the system is making sense of all those in one place where you can just report on it, get that to the right board or commission or leader that's working on this initiative. Nice.
We're ready to move on to number 3.
I think it's
This
good.
is use CBOs. These are community-based organizations. This also happens to be one of my favorite topics. So we're talking about community-based organizations, whether they're formal groups like churches or clubs or neighborhood associations, or even informal. Brad brought this up the other day, is Facebook affinity groups. There
Yep.
is a lot comes to community-based organizations to consider. This year's findings showed that 63% of residents have some to a great deal of trust in CBOs. So this isn't a surprise. It really highlights community-based organizations as a natural bridge for growing reach into areas of your community. And I think the CBO partnerships are really exciting and kind of like a shortcut to gaining access to people you might not otherwise reach. Like what a little friendship and partnership can get for your effort is amazing. I don't know. I think were you guys talking about something in Asheville the other day? I'm blanking now. There was something you guys were saying about
Asheville's community groups. Well, there's certainly a growing set of partners we work with that have their database of CBOs in public input. And some of that, the simple step just to get an inventory of those things and then map them tells you a ton about where we are in that journey as an organization. So what corners of the community do we have folks working boots on the ground that know our residents? That's just a big focus from a tech perspective, just to map that. The second piece of this is just then to automate how do we make sure our distribution for every engagement initiative, making sure that it's, of course, relevant to this particular area or this particular focus of an organization. How do we make sure they hear about it? So
Yeah.
in terms of how that works in public input, usually it's getting those folks into the database and then filtering your outreach to include them. So I think there's a growing amount of work in this space. We'll talk a little bit about like what that unlocks, but in the very basic approach here is just make sure we are including them in the loop when we're reaching out, because that helps us actually expand our reach to their constituents.
We want to take advantage of folks who've built trust and built networks in the community, because a lot of that, that groundwork is hard, and we want to take advantage of those networks and those leaders in the community who've done that hard work and built their groups so that we can broaden the folks we're able to ask and essentially legitimize, right? And also identify if there's interest holders who we need to make sure that they have trust in the organization that's sending out the ask.
Right. Especially if they can forward things along and say, hey, please share your input. It's important to our org.
Yeah. I think we had a comment that was like, I'm getting so many text messages, and it's like, it's so important to get from a channel that you trust and ask to participate in these things, especially for the first time participants and for people who haven't necessarily been engaged before.
Yeah. And North Carolina DOT was actually at the pioneer of this on public input. They had started an initiative to essentially collect from all the different teams working in communities and in each district to bring the list of groups that they've worked with, get that into a database, and use any address or geo information to put those into a map. So now when teams are beginning a project, they can look at the project area they're working in, and even if they're not an expert on that community, they can see the groups that are in that community. So by doing that, they have access and reach to the right folks. We also avoid situations where we overlook a key community group that has a clear vested interest in the outcome of a process, and also make sure we get our outreach to the right people. So some of that, we do a lot of the data sourcing on this now, or we'll go and essentially purchase data on these groups in key areas and bring that into a database. And then once multiple teams are working from that, so if you've got the DOT and let's say the local transit organization and city and county, they can all share access to the same database of community groups. It's been a big unlock for just helping teams get a sense of who they need to reach.
and seeing it on the map.
Yeah, and seeing it on a map is magical, right? We'll have one of our next points is it doesn't mean that you can replace direct community outreach with engagement with these groups, but these groups are amazingly helpful for reaching the right people. in every corner of the area of your community you're looking to serve,
Yeah.
whether that's a single neighborhood or a
There's,
city or you name it.
yeah, there's often communities that we don't necessarily reach, or folks that are particularly hard to engage with, and having these bridges to those communities, so that you as a organization can then ask for the people that they are engaged with to engage directly in the process is really important. I think that's the next insight that I think we're going to be able to talk about here.
Yeah. Super important
Well,
dichotomy. We're going to get to that in a second, but first, we've got
one
a
more
quick audience
question.
poll.
Oh yeah, we got a poll question. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, basically, this is about your engagement design. So when you're designing participation efforts, are you thinking about CBOs, both formal and informal, as we've kind of defined here? What do you think they're saying? I can see what they're saying.
Yeah, I don't
Got
get
a
the
big,
preview. You get the real-time data.
yeah,
We need to do these on public input. I'll watch the data
I'll see
roll
it at
in.
the same time.
Yeah,
Couple of
there we go. So I think we do have a
percent.
special, there's a little bit of a selection bias when you have a webinar on engagement. You've got folks that are already thinking about this in a bit more of a proactive way, but it's really good to see that focus.
Mhm. Okay, getting in the home stretch. We've got two more
Well,
insights to
I'll just
go.
note about the
Oh,
poll question. I think memorializing that is so important, right? You're not just saying we reached 30,000 people in an email, but you're also saying here's the list of community organizations that we were engaged with,
Yeah.
and being able to tell that story of your engagement process is so important to your elected officials when they're making their policy decisions.
Yeah, that goes back to number one, right? Show your reach.
Mhm.
And so if we don't document all the different groups we're engaging with, let's say again, we end up with a situation where low engagement happens, or maybe a handful of folks come back really, against something that the organization's looking to do. At least you've demonstrated that we also contacted all these organizations, and here's what we've heard.
Yeah.
That's great. So,
okay.
can we just engage with our groups and call it a day?
Huh, that would be so easy, wouldn't
Yeah,
it?
we'll just make a few phone calls here, be done.
Yeah. Okay. So, like we said, this fourth insight builds a little on what we did before. The directly insight really tells a story about how residents respond when they face barriers to participation. So, what we asked in the survey is if you couldn't join a meeting or give input because the options didn't fit your needs, what would you do? And so here's what we found. Some of the residents said they would look for other ways to participate. Others said that they would share their thoughts on social media. But what stood out most was that while many residents said they trust community groups, they also made it clear that they don't want these groups speaking for them. And only about 1 in 4 felt comfortable using a proxy at all. So while community groups can be powerful access points, like we talked about, once residents are in the room or online, they told us they want the opportunity to speak for themselves. And
It makes
it was
sense. It's like community groups are a great way to reach people, but then if you ask any individual, like, "Hey, are you okay with this group speaking on your behalf?" It's a no. I want to make sure my opinion gets directly delivered. Uh, Maybe it's a sign of the times. It's definitely an interesting inverse of the prior insight, right? When you have like 60+% of residents saying, "Yeah, I trust this group," but then almost only a quarter of that, or a third of that, um, are saying I'm fine with them representing my voice. So
And
it's a reminder that like it's a yes and again in this situation, like let's use those groups to reach our community, but let's also make sure we're doing direct engagement with residents.
it's an interesting thing because we have a lot of research that looks at sort of how interest holders are engaged in these processes and how they're often used as a way to represent different groups. And a lot of times we grab like the individual who's the same individual that always represents the same neighborhood. And this insight's telling us that like, hey, it's great if that person sends an email because it's an entree to it. But the people that are in their community group, who come to their meetings, who do participate in those things, want to speak for themselves. And given the broad array of tools available now, there's lots of ways to sort of create that sort of stepped process where reach is first, and then individuals can speak for themselves and share their own voice and their own opinions about things.
Yeah, And I think most engagement practitioners that have been at this for a while bring a healthy sense of skepticism when someone says, "I speak on behalf of the bicyclists of this community." When I say, whatever the group, when one person appoints themselves the spokesperson for that group, there's probably something that's a little off there. So again, when we have the data to show, hey, we hear from these individuals and we recognize that they have valid input, but we also have directly heard from the folks in the community, and maybe it contrasts a bit with what we're hearing from the spokespeople. So the good news here is you don't have to choose between these things. You can do both. And the case study that jumped out was in Asheville, North Carolina. And many of you are probably aware of Hurricane Helene and its devastating impact on Asheville and Western North Carolina, and that the recovery effort there is still actively happening today. Uh, a clean example of that direct outreach is the way their team really leaned in on direct resident engagement following the storm and throughout the recovery effort, still actively ongoing right now. But they've engaged 7,000 residents in this process and in the efforts to rebuild and recover and prioritize, finite resources. We can't fix everything at once. Where do we want to put our resources? Debris cleanup, housing, economic development, all of those things. They're listening directly to residents to shape those priorities. And when we look at some of the AI comment analysis and the way they're understanding what they're hearing, some of the insights are actually maybe counterintuitive. I saw one where a very large chunk of the participants were really focused on debris cleanup, even over housing issues, which you'd think it was the other way around. But by going directly to residents, they can more deeply understand the concerns and the needs and prioritize their efforts. And again, the trust thread that runs throughout all of this is so critical. When folks don't hear directly from you, it's easy for the narrative to spin out of control, and a lot of those recovery efforts got politicized. If you remember the early days of post Helene, it was a national political polarizing issue of, was the recovery being handled appropriately or not? It's like at the end of the day, the city of Asheville has to have that long-term relationship with their residents. They're not going to move on with the next news cycle. So by going directly to the residents and asking them, what do you need? How can we help? They can build that trust and sustain that long-term investment in their community.
Yep. I think this is a great example of a situation where the natural thing would have just been to call all the usual suspects into a room and say, what do we need to do? But in creating the secondary opportunity for engagement quickly putting that out there and trying to get insights, that it created a complementary sort of set of insights from that stakeholder group. So this is a great example of where we have tons of research in sort of in emergency management that looks at sort of how we assemble stakeholders and how we get all those folks together in a room when there's an emergency, when there's a fire, when there's a hurricane or something like that. But this is a great example of how going to the public, leveraging those channels, pushing the reach as far as you can, gives you a whole complementary set of insights that also need to be addressed in those situations.
We got another poll question.
Comes poll question.
Our routine now. This one's a satisfaction question. Do you feel satisfied with your current efforts to have meaningful community conversations? Ooh.
These are anonymous, right?
They're anonymous, maybe.
Yeah, no one wants to go on the
Steph,
record like, I'm not happy with it. I want to do better.
I'm surprised by the answers to this one.
Hey, generally, as human beings, we're
Sort
never
of.
truly satisfied. We're always
Yeah, I guess
we're
so.
always, on to the next horizon. That's what makes us, innovators, right? We were constantly solve problems in new ways. Yes. Okay. I'm glad that this group validates that. I was like, if it's inverse to that, then that is super interesting. Yeah. So as a group that's never satisfied with the status quo, that's never satisfied where we are today, it's always, where do we go next? How do we keep improving?
Yeah.
We're here for it.
I think, that's not surprising, right? That we want to do more. I think, especially the folks on this call want to do more and want to manage that. And I think this next bit about budget, especially the research I can tell you about, provides an interesting sort of tension that exists a lot of times in these conversations about having meaningful conversations.
Yeah. And this is my favorite slide in the whole deck because of this jacket. I hope I'm not stylish at that point in my life.
No, we've spent our whole practice round on this slide just talking about this guy.
Yeah,
Oh my
absolutely.
God.
Yeah,
What is he
this is what
studying?
derailed all of our prep time. But
You
yeah,
know, I mean, you know this person. I'm sure all of you have a different understanding of what this person's saying right now, based on your own experiences and practice, and the conversations you've had with your community, and
the
even if
quiz will be
whether or not
what
this guy's an
community?
impediment to good conversations.
Yeah, what issue is this person talking about, and what community is this in? Anyhow,
Yeah.
we'll keep it moving. The
Okay.
budget. Everybody's right this time of year we're out of budget season for most of you that are on July 1 fiscal, but it's looming just around the corner in the spring. And go ahead. I don't want to derail our format. Trisha, share out the
It's okay.
headlines
I'm
there.
enjoying it. Um, okay, so this is our final insight. It's about the importance of budget engagement. We asked residents, how important is it to hear from your local government when they're making budget cuts or reducing programs? And so the response was overwhelming. 81% of residents said it was important or very important for them to have a voice in these decisions. And while sometimes these efforts may not always grab headlines, the recurring budget planning process is clearly something that these residents are caring about. Um, they're overwhelming. They said they want to be involved, they want a voice.
And this is a real tension, I think, from the perspective of research. This is a real tension because in the normal sort of bins of folks you think about who are doing engagement, uh, that the budget officers, folks who are doing financial work for agencies, are the most conservative in terms of the engagement that they're comfortable doing for a variety of different reasons. But I think it's important to sort of think of this slide in a broader sort of context as well, that when you can bring finance into the question, even for planning projects, that it's really valuable and can engage people more. I mean, a couple of the projects we talked about today deal with allocations of money outside of a normal budget process. And I think the cases Jay is going to be able to talk to today speak to sort of different phases about where people are on the continuum of that budget engagement. Because a lot of times we sort of think of the public hearing. That's what the gentleman in the last slide was probably speaking at, is some sort of public hearing for a budget process. And when we think of that sort of caricature, it's often late in the process, and there's some there's often a little bit of an anxiety, certainly, about that phase in the process. But we know the public wants to be engaged in these processes. We have a lot of research that says there's all sorts of different interesting ways to do that. But the ambivalence is often that they don't want to necessarily derail the process. So there's different ways to engage in the budget process that range from sort of very traditional, almost conventional, to much more highly engaged.
So most of you on the call today are probably not directly involved in the finance team or the budgeting process. But if you're in communications, or you know the team that runs the budgeting process, a common refrain we hear is like, well, we don't want to put the budget out there too widely, especially if we are facing a really tight budget year. We don't want to hear a bunch of new ideas for how to spend money. The way that we actually recommend approaching this is to, earlier in that process, hear resident concerns, especially if we're making cuts. So if you're part of a community that was impacted by federal changes where grant dollars are drying up, or perhaps there's from a budgeting perspective, a local issue that's affecting next year's budget, and we know we have to make changes, make cuts, it increases the need to get ahead of that with the community. And there's a couple ways that takes shape. We'll talk about this briefly here in the next case study. But by getting in front of residents earlier in the process, you can hear those concerns directly. And because it's not the midnight in the budgeting process, we can actually still bring that back to folks that are trying to make trade-offs and make decisions, and say, you know what, obviously we put out there that we probably got to cut library hours next year. We heard from residents that they're really concerned about weekend hours, right? And so those are things that you can then say, well, could we look at preserving weekend hours and changing our weekday operations? Ultimately, by listening early, if we can find some wins where we say, hey, we heard you, and here's how we're incorporating that feedback. By doing that a couple months before it's time to actually pass the budget, you're able to make some tweaks to make things happen. It doesn't mean that you can't do engagement right before it's time to pass a budget. There's still value to that, in the sense that you can provide whether it's your elected leaders or your departmental leadership, with the concerns so they can build their narrative. There's value to that for sure. But our recommendation would be to start this now. If you're a July 1 fiscal, if you're September, probably sometime early in the spring, let's start having those conversations about how are we going to engage residents? How are we going to make sure that we can build trust even in a situation where we have to make cuts?
Mhm.
So Boone County, Kentucky was the example that we pulled up here. They did a great job with providing highlights across a number of the different areas that they were considering changes in their spending and the capital projects that they had on the docket. You know, we can't build all of these. Like, how are we going to prioritize these? And ultimately being able to use that input from their entire community, including a lot of non-English participants and rural participants, ultimately factoring that into the key decisions they had to make as a team.
Yeah, it's a great example of a late. This is normally where the budget sort of ask happens, right? Here's the prepared budget. What do you think about it? How do you think about our priorities? What do you want to provide? That I think it's a great example of this. But I think to Jay's point, the idea that if you're interested in doing this and thinking about both cuts and increases, and also just sort of sentiment about what's going on, earlier in the process makes a lot of sense. I saw a question, and we can get into more details on it, but I saw a question sort of asking, how do you, when people don't want to share their location with you? But early in a budget process, you can ask very high level, very generic sort of prioritization type questions that are ongoing. And those type of engagement questions can be really valuable just to even just get people's email addresses and get them engaged and get them trusting government more. This is once we get to where Boone County has here, we're at a point where there's something for people to react to, and it's much more detailed. These budgets are often hundreds of pages long, right? It's very challenging. But earlier on in the process, highlighting Frederick County here, they did little workshops early on, and it was not just an online survey where you're necessarily engaging, but it's also in-person sort of workshops, asking about prioritization, asking about trade-offs, asking about those type of things. That's all really great data that helps enforce. And because we talked about this, 80% of people are saying they care about the budget process, they care about those things. Waiting till the end, potentially people feel, oh, I'm not an expert in this. And some of my research looked at like how agentic do people feel around actually dealing with this complexity. They just say, oh, that's too much for me. If you just ask for their top 5 priorities or their top priority out of 5, you get their email address, you can start the conversation earlier and build trust with your agency. And it is sort of building toward that longer term ongoing conversation about things without necessarily being too in the weeds about the specific community center that gets funding over or not.
Yeah, it's perfect. So call to action on this. Well, let's go ahead and do the quiz. And while the quiz is rolling in, we'll talk through kind of how to. There we go.
Yeah, this
Our
is
details.
more about, do you build in budget implications into your engagement process?
So do you do budget engagement essentially?
Yeah, building it in. I
Yeah.
think Brad said when we were planning this, like, people get really interested when money's involved. So
Yeah.
are those
Yeah.
budget implications built in whenever
It's a
you do
great way.
engagement?
Yeah. If you're looking at, like, gosh, I wish we engage more of our community, the budget process is a great place to start, right? Everyone's a stakeholder. And yeah. So in terms of where we go, it looks like if you're a current public input user and your organization hasn't run its budget process, your customer success manager can help show you examples of what that looks like. We sent out an email probably in the last couple months about our new budget simulator, where residents can drag sliders on different categories, and there's a bit of information about what each category does. That's maybe the more advanced way to do this. The simplified version of that might look like a few prioritization questions and open-ended things.
But
But yeah.
even finding, so this is finding low stakes projects that have some investment. So this is like light participatory budgeting things. Like which of these murals should we invest in? We're going to invest X amount of money in a mural project. All of those are financial things. It's just a matter of showing that you're helping make those financial choices. People get super excited about that. So when you have planning projects, we did a whole bunch of ARPA, I know Public Input did a whole bunch of ARPA projects. People got super excited because it was like, okay, this is an actual cash going into some investment in the community. I can be part of that. It's not necessarily, the finance officers can be a little tricky about opening up for the negativity. Creating budget implications can get people super engaged.
Yeah. and seeing some good comments on for DOTs. What does that look like? A lot of times the same
Yeah.
tools we're using for city and county budgets are the tools that we're using for DOT STIPs, so the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. So if you haven't seen NCDOT STIP, it looks a lot like a local budgeting process, because not only do you have all the projects on the map, but you've got the priorities exercise with the budget sliders. So definitely a great opportunity to leverage public input there if you haven't already. Good stuff.
We made it through 05, guys.
Is that all 5? Hey,
That was
we're
all
looking great on
5.
time.
And we're doing great on time.
And it's a weaving, right? This is a weaving thing. You want to expand your reach. You want to give people opportunities they're doing different things, right? You want to leverage your community partners to expand that reach, but engage people directly. And if you want to increase salience, you want to add money to it.
Hey, I like it. Repeating it
Well,
again, we want to make sure we can demonstrate we've reached folks, because if we get low engagement, but we reached everybody, that's actually not a problem. That means that this, is a relatively non-controversial thing. Move it forward. So make sure you've got ways to document every corner of the community is being reached, that your key stakeholders have been reached. On the modernizing participation, that mostly is about our email, postal mail, and text. It's funny to include postal mail in modern, but in terms of the top 3 preferences from residents, we're seeing email, postal mail, and text. Good one to remember there. Community partners, people trust their CBOs, and it's a great way as an organization. If you don't have a distribution list today with CBOs, public input can help you build that out. But reach those groups and use them as a conduit to touch every corner of your community, because they've got the access, they've got the trust. That said, let's flip that inside around. Don't use CBOs as the voice of your community by themselves. They are important stakeholders, but they cannot replace direct engagement. Residents want to hear from you directly. And that's, of course, what we mean by engage directly. So using all these different approaches, engaging directly. And last but not least, if you haven't considered using an engagement solution for your budgeting process, start thinking about that today, get ahead of it, start having some of those conversations about how we might approach that and get resident voices into the process. It's a great way to grow our database of engaged residents. It's a great way to build trust, even in a situation where you're having to perhaps take away services that have traditionally been there for residents. Those can be trust building exercises, but the key thing is starting early and making sure we reflect back what we hear. Did I recap that all right, Tricia?
that was perfect. I loved
You
it.
spent a lot of time with the data, so yes,
I
I
did.
appreciate that.
We got one
So
more cool question.
yeah,
Also,
and I get to pull up my phone again and make sure this QR code works.
yes.
Got
We're gonna
your
slide
call. Nice.
into Q&A too after this. This is just if you want us to reach out, or if you want to get our amazing newsletter, which I happen to be involved in. So maybe that's a biased opinion, but
Yeah.
just click the button.
And when we say call, this is not like necessarily a product demo. We can certainly bring some product elements to that, but generally our process is we want to first learn about what your needs are, how your community engagement works today, if there's a way for us to support that, and learn a little bit more about the potential solutions we could bring to the table. Typically, that's one of our engagement experts. We've been doing this now for 11 years. We've got a lot of folks on the team that, cumulatively probably 50 plus years of experience, if not more. Happy to bring that to the table, help you get there. And then from there, we can decide is a product demo and solutioning appropriate, and how best can we help?
Hey, let's get into the Q&A. I see there's a lot of things going on in the chat and Q&A. So let me look in Q&A first. First person says, when you state residents, you are talking especially about surveyed folks who are legally residing in U.S. soil, or are you alluding to inhabitants, regardless of their regularized status?
Language matters.
Yeah.
So the funny thing is, when we first started this company, the name of the company was Cities In, and the more we did this work, the more we realized that all stakeholders might not necessarily be citizens. And even, if you're looking at specific types of communities that may have folks coming in and out of that community, they might not even be, actually, they might not be living in that community at that time. Think of vacation destinations and the like. So we've chosen residents as the primary term, because usually when you think about the constituents that you're looking to serve, there's the political side of that, which is saying, what does that mean if you are a legal resident or not? But ultimately, if you're a resident, we're using that language to describe the people that we're reaching out to understand. If citizenship status is important, you can always ask about those kinds of things. Obviously, that's a tricky subject. So, all that to say, not to wade into a highly politicized issue. We say residents because we think about the folks that we're serving, that live in a place, that work in a place, that are operating and living their lives there.
This
Yeah,
next
that's a
one's a
great
little
point.
technical. How can we feel confident in our reach when locations may be based on VPNs if people don't feel comfortable sharing their zip code, nearest cross street, or address?
Yeah,
And many of our equity segments are based on their location. Do we just accept this as the best approximation?
it's a great question. So the point here is that uh, public input as a platform allows lots of different ways to collect locations. So people can share their cross streets, or they can use like their device location. They can provide a zip code. But in the background, if we can get a IP address that is associated with a known general location, we work with a third-party data provider to include that. So that way, I'd say most of the time, less than a third of the folks that arrive and participate are willing to share deep demographic data. It's just Pew has studied this. It's one of these challenges where, because trust in government isn't at 100%, the people are not necessarily all willing to share deep information about themselves. But we still need to generally understand where they're coming from in order to know how we're doing as an organization. And so even with all of those methods combined, you probably still won't reach 100% certainty of where everyone's coming from. But as a platform, we're aiming to get that to a really high percentage. So can we get that into the 80+%? And generally with GeoIP plus these other methods, you can get there, which is pretty cool.
I'll just complement that by saying this is why an ecosystem of engagement around a project matters so much. That different levels and intensities of engagement. I saw even a question about like quality and depth of engagement here. Uh, when you have the top of the funnel and you're asking sort of high level generic questions about priorities and preferences and really collecting emails and just getting a sense, for lack of a better term, the vibes of a project, it's not necessarily as critical to necessarily know that they're from the specific neighborhood that this affects, right? But as we get deeper into the more intense parts of it, it does. So creating an ecosystem around a project of multiple different engagement types that give people different ways to provide engagement becomes really important. And then as you get more intense and it becomes more potentially critical that you know those people are from those places, then that's when you sort of start asking that. But you can compare sort of the differences. So if the vibe test said one thing and then this said something completely different, then you can sort of say, well, we actually have a gap here between what people who don't seem to want to tell us where they're at in this, and your policymakers, your political principles can sort of digest between that. And then there's a secondary question on here, this notion of contact building and co-creation. I know that public input really is focused on making sure that all the data that's collected through a process is managed and sort of aggregated in a way that allows comparing sort of the relationship building there, who's engaging a lot. What this sets up is the potential for that type of thing. I can see the person, I can see that Brad engaged this way, this way, this way. Maybe I want to invite Brad to a more intensive sort of collaborative relationship building conversation, right? Brad's not engaged in any of the community organizations I'm engaged with, but I seem to see that he's really involved. How should I involve him? It gives you those insights to sort of to lean on your analog type engagement. A lot of times it's sort of scattershot where that necessarily comes from, but the insights about who those people are who might help you with co-creation, who might be your advocates, who might be the folks. The Charleston example, going from 1% to 16% positive, is incredible. Now you have people in the community who can potentially come to those meetings and you can leverage and build relationships with, who potentially want to be more positive about sort of difficult conversations.
Here's another
Excellent.
question. It says changes over time to see if priorities have changed is a good point. Can we see if specific people or groups change and if our projects are making a difference?
It's a really
That's
great
a really good thought.
question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's ultimately why we built the database layer of this, right? You want to see over time, are we growing our reach? Are we increasing engagement and return engagement from individuals? So one of the key things that we've built out for our customer success managers. So teams typically meet with their customer success manager every month. One of the reports they can pull is the engagement over time report. So it's a series of charts just looking at different slices of data And pretty much without exception, we always see this nice trend with if you're doing a lot of different types of engagement on different kinds of projects and in different areas of the region you serve, that number keeps growing. And as long as we're capturing contact info along the way, we're re-engaging, and we can follow up and see that if someone comes back after engaging and they become a repeat participant, that's one of the key metrics we look for there. And I think the second question around how do we know if we're having an impact, that maybe looks a little different for each team. But the thing we want to do is give you the tools to be able to track and measure that instead of it having to be, we call it Groundhog Day, where every time you do engagement, it's like starting from scratch, which is familiar for a lot of you. So building that database gives you the way to not only understand, are we building trust, are we increasing engagement, but every time we go back to the public, we have a larger group to go to than we did the prior time. And I love, by the way, the chat going on. This is great. We'll certainly follow up. I think we're looking to do more peer exchanges and the like. So if you haven't already, lean into the next public input peer exchange. If you're not a
December.
current, I think right now it's current customers only. We may look at a format where we can bring in folks that have not yet joined up with public input. But I love these conversations because that's part of our value. It's just getting folks together and sharing what's working and where they're at.
I'm so busy looking at the questions, I missed the chat. Okay, this one's from our friends at Caltrans. Once we build out our CBO database, how can you show the data of the CBOs you've engaged or used as a conduit? And is there a stat in the platform that can show this?
Ah, that's a good one to lean into with product. I think there's a couple lenses to look at it through. The CRM, if we wanted to build a list of specific CBOs, you could pull reports there. That could be a good one to follow up with the CSM. And there may be some places where you need to add another lens to look at the data, but data's there. Let's figure out the right way to look at it for sure.
Okay, I'm trying to pick
Excellent.
here.
Thanks, Trisha.
I think I can briefly respond to the boots on the ground thing. I think
Okay, thank
the
you.
goal of having this type of data ultimately should be that if you're doing analog efforts, so this isn't public input unless something drastically has changed, is not putting canvassers on the ground necessarily in these situations, but it should give you the intelligence about where you're putting your analog resources. It's not just canvassers, but it's also choosing where to put your public meetings. It's choosing where to be thoughtful about reaching out to community-based organizations, but also if you always go to the same community center, but you find that community is responding to your first set of questions online in a really active way, then you might want to put your investment, your time cost in a community center that has a neighborhood that hasn't been as engaged. So this data can help sort of make those analog decisions. If you decide to hire canvassers or a consulting group that does canvassers, this data should help make those decisions more intelligently.
Perfect.
I think one more question. We got 1 minute or 2 minutes. What about youth engagement? This is another group of people that are often left out because they can't vote.
Yeah.
One of our award winners last year, our Excellence in Community Engagement Award winners, was all about youth engagement. There's a case study out there about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Campo in North Carolina, I think, is the one that we may have that case study on from the awards for, was it the 2024 awards?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Got it. So if you search for CAMPO 2024 Public Input Awards, that should pop up. If not, the quick summary there is they did a great job of doing engagement with teenagers, primarily through, I believe, high school events and direct outreach. We've seen a lot of teams have success with like paper surveys within schools, and bringing that into the platform. I think it's a great point to keep in mind. So always thinking about the context of who we're reaching, and of course being able to use the CRM, use the demographic indicators to show who we've reached as well.
CRM meaning?
Oh yes, yeah, and it means so many different things for different people, but ultimately it's our database of residents that have engaged.
People who live there, yeah.
Community
as I saw in the chat, people who live here.
People who, I love that plain language. We're always getting better with the language there.
No, it's just a fun, great thing. So
yeah, we're all learning together. I really appreciate the engagement and the questions through the chat here, and we always walk away from these things with new ideas and perspectives, and course, this is our annual kind of grounding process to make sure we're putting residents first and the perspective. It's wild to see how it continues evolving. Obviously, the technologies are changing, but at the core of all of this is like we're looking to reach people, understand them, and build trust through that process. So public input, as the technology evolves, as the mission continues, we're here to help make sure that you have that direct relationship with your residents, that you can build that trust and ultimately be a more responsive, effective government in the process. We appreciate you taking the time today and look forward to continuing this journey together.
Okay.
Thanks, Brad, Steph, and Tricia.
Appreciate y'all.
See
Happy
everybody
to be a
soon.
resource if needed for anybody on the call.
Have a good day.